Right, so welcome everybody to 12 and a half kick-ass sustainability ideas for 2019, which didn't quite fit on the slide, which is an introduction to our Green Academy online training webinars, and I will talk a lot more about them as we go on. So, who am I? Who is Gareth Kane? Well, I've been doing sustainability for somewhere 20, 21, 22 years, depending on when you count my sort of gradual ramp from amateur to professional. So I've been about a long time, and I've written 5 books on the subject, of which I'm immensely proud. The one I'm holding in the picture, 3 Secrets to Green Business, my first one, which is sort of me downloading my brain about 10 years ago. I then got a lot of queries about sustainability at more leadership level, more strategic leadership level. So I wrote The Green Executive, which features 18 interviews with green business leaders, which are worth the price of the book alone. And then I wrote these 3 Doe Shorts guides, one called Green Jiu-Jitsu that we'll be talking about later, but it's all about how to do employee engagement effectively. Building a sustainable supply chain, I think, does what it says in the tin, as does accelerating sustainability using the 80-20 rule. So if you want any more on me, that would be great. Some of the people joining us putting video up, if you could please change your video and audio options on the viewer to switch your video off, because if many more do it, I will end up sounding academic, and that will not be great for anyone, particularly on the recording. Okay, so 10, 12 years ago, I set up Terra Firma Limited. I went solo after working for a number of organizations on sustainability. And over the years, we have sort of refined our services down to 3 main areas. One, sustainability strategy. So setting targets and working out how to reach those targets. Then employee engagement stroke culture change. I don't like saying culture change because, as you will see later on, I don't believe you can change culture exactly. But employee engagement, which is the flip side of sustainability, and many people say, quote Peter Drucker and say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And then the third stream is professional development, of which Green Academy is part. And as you can see from the plethora of logos there, we have worked with there's a lot more than fits on this page, but a large number of leading companies, including leaders in sustainability such as Interface, who always turn up and feature in my webinars. So this is the taster for Green Academy, which after this taster consists of 10 themed sessions. And they're run in a very similar way to this. They are structured to follow roughly the contents of the Green Executive, but they've evolved over the years. Every time I run it, I update and change things to either improve how we explain them or bring new thinking and new case studies in. So it's constantly getting refreshed, but it follows that basic structure. And one of the unique things about Green Academy is, I don't know about you, I go on lots of webinars and lots of things. I often find about halfway through I switch off and miss all the good bits. In order to keep your attention and make sure you actually apply the thinking, we provide you with a workbook, which you can complete as you go along. This is the workbook for this session. There's only really one exercise this time. Most sessions there's 3, 4, or 5. But this one's there's just one. So I'll explain it now before we get started. The ideas are down the left-hand side. In the middle, how you can apply that idea to your organization or your situation or your clients, however that works for you. Then there's 2 boxes to rate each of these ideas. One of them is the opportunities, benefits, upsides, whatever way you want to think of it, and the other one is risk, cost, or whatever downsides there might be to that. And I want you to rank each one of your ideas as we go along, high, medium, or low. I am not going to tell you what high, medium, or low mean to you. You can decide, but for me, high would mean something like, yeah, I've really got to go for this, or on the risk side, no way, this could really sink us. Low would mean negligible risk or negligible upside, so not really worth bothering about. A medium would be something you're not interested in between. We tend to work on that sort of quite sort of quick and dirty assessment type level, rather than having you hanging on a webinar trying to do complex life cycle assessments or anything like that. So if you have that in front of you, please fill it in as we go along. I'm not going to stop until the end of the 12 the first 12 ideas, and I will just let you fill in that as you go along. If you have questions, as I say, please put them in the chat box. I will read them out and I will answer them, but I will pick and choose the time in which I will do that. Okay, if everybody's happy with the workbook, then I will flick back to the presentation and we will get on with what you're here to hear about, is these 12 and a half, but we'll come to the half kick-ass ideas. And number one is how to sell sustainability to anyone. Bold claim, a very bold claim. And selling sustainability is very difficult. It's kind of a trick question, because the solution is not to sell sustainability. It's to get that person or those people to sell sustainability to themselves. And if any of you have ever been in one of my workshops, you will know that I will generally start by walking up to a blank flip chart page and writing, why should your organization, or you, or we, take sustainability seriously? I then shut up and wait for the first answer. Somebody will stick up their hand and say legislation. I'll write down legislation. Then somebody else will say, oh, save money, so I'll write down save money. And then somebody will say PR, so I'll write PR, and then I'll say PR to public relations to who you want to speak to. And somebody will say customers, so you write down customers beside PR. And I just keep doing that until the sheet is full. By that time, nobody in the room will be arguing whether or not sustainability is an option, because they will have sold sustainability to themselves, which is much more powerful than me doing it. So that's how I do it in a workshop, but you can do it on a smaller basis and one-to-one basis, is try to ask questions, try and get the person to sell sustainability to themselves. Like, just ask that question. What sustainability drivers are you feeling, Mr. or Mrs. Chief Executive Officer? Etc., etc. So you can do it, but the key to all of this is to get the individual to sell sustainability to themselves before you try and tell them. Because if you try and tell somebody something about the organization, particularly at the top level, they will try and knock down your argument and you'll just end up arguing. This method works far better, I promise you. Okay, number two. I get told off for this. People get quite upset about this one. The waste hierarchy, the reduce, reuse, recycle, recover energy, landfill, is 40 years old this year. And my view is it's starting to outlive its usefulness. It is fine if you're talking to people about doing a bit of waste minimization around the office or something like that. But on the grand sustainability picture, I think it has a fundamental problem, and that is it focuses our minds on waste as a problem rather than seeing waste as an opportunity. Right? And I can understand 1979, when I was just 8 years old, I was almost literally in short trousers, that, trying to reduce waste seemed like a sensible idea. Now we're looking at massive sustainability issues, and in particular, we're looking at the circular economy. The circular economy will only work if we bring quality raw materials out of it. So we've got to think about demand for raw materials rather than finding solutions for waste. So an example, I said I was going to mention Interface, largest carpet tile manufacturer in the world, and I would argue the most sustainable company in the world, although for some reason they don't seem to hit the tops of those annual polls that various organizations run. But if you scratch the surface on what Interface do, it's amazing. So they have an ambition to have a zero impact on the planet by 2020. Now, there's a caveat to that. They define what they mean by sustainable. And they decided that in terms of raw materials, everything they use would either have to be naturally sourced material or secondary material. And their carpets are traditionally made out of various types of oil, usually turned into nylon first for the actual fluff. I've used the wrong word there, but never mind. They looked at all sorts of sources, and they decided that the only sustainable source of raw materials that could deliver at the quantities they wanted was old carpet. So they've been working on business models to, when they install carpet, they remove the old carpet and recycle it back into the system. Because that way, without it going through sort of civic, local authorities waste systems, they can control the quality of it. So they're looking at ways of improving the quality of those goods and the carpet by focusing on quality raw materials, not on waste diversion. But if you're wondering why there's a picture of fishing nets on the side, many of you will probably know that a third of all the ocean plastic that we're all worried about at the minute comes from discarded fishing nets and other materials basically lost from the fishing industry. They have a premium product that they call Networks, where they take those fishing nets, reprocess them, and sell them as carpets. So they're sort of topping up this circular economy, this closed circle of carpets with fishing nets, because that will eventually get recycled into the system as well. Neither of those solutions would have come about if the individuals involved weren't thinking about raw materials. If they were thinking about waste, Interface wouldn't be interested because these are other people's wastes. But by thinking of sustainable raw materials, they are driving this massive change in the carpet industry, in the carpet sector, towards sustainable raw materials. And that is why I think the waste hierarchy should not be at the forefront in our minds anymore. People get really upset about that. You think I was a heretic. I have been insulted by people for daring to say that. Speaking of ocean plastics, I know we've got something of an international audience today. Here in the UK, a program called Blue Planet, and pictures like this one, which was taken from National Geographic, have created this sort of war on plastic. The public suddenly wants to deal with all sorts of plastic things. Quite understandably, because a picture like this is very evocative. Now, arguably, probably inarguably, the biggest threat to a seahorse is not cotton buds, but climate change. And I had a coaching client speak to me some time ago and said, all my sustainability champions want to talk to me about plastic. I want to talk to them about carbon. What do I do? And I said, go with it. If you've got their enthusiasm, it's hard enough to engage people in sustainability. If they're enthusiastic about that, go for it. And don't forget, the second point of this is if you're talking about sustainability champions and they're volunteers, you should see them as the oil in the engine rather than the engine itself. They're helping sustainability happen. You can't drive change through sustainability champions anyway. So if they want to talk plastic, get them involved, and don't worry so much about your agenda. Think more about theirs. And I've seen some wonderful examples. One of my clients, one of their sites, the duck board is the center of everything sustainability. And basically, somebody with an interest in ducks, there was a duck pond on site, started leaving out proper bird food because they didn't want people feeding the ducks bread. And then they started putting information about ducks on the duck board, and then they started introducing other sustainability information about ducks, and people read it because they like the ducks, and it's all associated around the ducks. Sounds crazy from an outsider, but the more you hear about it, the more you see it's genius, and they've gone with what works for other people. Careful not to take this too far, because I really did sort of spit out my coffee when I read this story. First plastic-free flight in decades departs Lisbon. You know, given the climate ambitions of the climate impacts of the airline industry, going plastic-free is, is minimal. Let's keep it in perspective, particularly when it goes to putting out press releases, because everybody will just laugh on the grand scale of things. So big picture is important, but if you're trying to get people engaged, go with what they want. Point number four, make sustainability easy. This sounds really obvious, but people, I don't know, some people in the sustainability field like to treat it as some sort of high priesthood. Where you have to prove your worth, like a novice monk, and go through self-flagellation and jump through all sorts of hoops and tests and trials of personality before you get to enlightenment, whatever else. And that is absolute nonsense. People tend to follow the path of least resistance. This picture always makes me laugh because however long ago, 16, 18 years ago, when I first started engaging business directly in sustainability, I used to suggest that instead of having a mixed waste bin by every desk and then a recycling bin down at the end of the corridor, that they should swap it round so it made it more likely that people would recycle paper because it's right beside them, and if they have to bin other stuff, then they can walk to the end of the corridor. And everybody laughed at me. Now it is becoming common practice because you're making sustainability easy. Another client of mine, they couldn't work out why nobody would use their teleconferencing system. We found out that in order to measure the effectiveness of the teleconferencing system, if you wanted to book it, you had to estimate the cost of the meeting you weren't having. Which, if the more you think about it, is really quite complex because you'd have to work out who was traveling from where, which form of transport, how much that's going to cost, whether they're booking a hotel room. If it's going to be a big faff, you might as well book a room in Outlook and chuck out an invitation, let everybody else work that out. They took away that bureaucracy, and the next thing you know, they had to double the capacity of the teleconferencing system because it was easier to use than traveling for a business meeting. So if you're looking for quick wins in a business, eliminating barriers to the behavior you want is often the most cost-effective way of starting on sustainability. So please do make sustainability easy. Number 5, ask for help. If you want to engage people in sustainability, particularly if you've got an awkward person in a sort of middle management position. I sometimes say middle management's where green projects go to die. If you want to get them thinking in a positive way about sustainability, then a crafty tactic is to ask them for some help. You have to find a genuine topic. So it might be a technical issue if it's a production manager, who will tend to be an engineer, so you can go along to them and say, do you think it's feasible to capture some heat off that refrigeration compressor and capture the hot and use it to heat water to save a bit of money? Do you think that's feasible? And try and get them to help you positively like that, rather than saying, you must do sustainability. Likewise, if you've got somebody in finance causing a bit of a problem, you go along to them and say, we're trying to make sure we've got the full costing of these different options, but we're not quite sure how to cost in carbon costs. Can you help me with that? Where I would find that information, how I would allocate it, how it would fit in. Then if you're getting them doing what they do as a day job for sustainability, you will find that will open doors. It's a sort of little tip which I've seen work. So the interface, the whole Mission Zero interface project started because somebody asked the chief executive whether he would come and give a presentation about what the company was doing in sustainability. And it was the voyage of discovery that Ray Anderson, that chief executive, now sadly deceased, went on that created Mission Zero. So it is very, very effective. Right. And all of this sort of engagement stuff that I've been talking about, I tend to encapsulate in an idea called green jiu-jitsu. The name of one of the books I mentioned earlier. The analogy is that most sustainability engagements, like boxing, we're trying to beat the other person into submission. You know, you see these people on the web sort of say, "Has anybody got a better poster for Recycling Week?" And you think, well, if sorry, excuse me. If a poster could change anything, we would have changed the world a long, long time ago. So we have to think more cleverly than that. Unlike a boxer, a jiu-jitsu expert uses their opponent's height, strength, weight, speed against them. So they see their strengths as opportunities rather than trying to find weaknesses. And it's this change in perspective that green jiu-jitsu is all about. So a bit like when we're talking in generic terms, we talked about idea number one, getting people to sell sustainability to themselves. That's classic green jiu-jitsu, because instead of you trying to do the boxing bit and beat them into submission by coming up with better facts and countering their counter arguments, blah, 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 you're getting them to think it through and using their brains to sell sustainability to themselves. But where it gets interesting, green jiu-jitsu, is this Venn diagram. I love a Venn diagram. We all filter out most of the information that lands in our senses. Otherwise, we would just go insane with the amount of information coming at us constantly. So, you know, if you ever find yourself flicking through a magazine in a dentist waiting room or something, most of the articles you're not interested in, and something will grab your attention and you'll stop and read it. The problem with most engagement is it is outside, it is filtered out. So it's outside that sort of circle of interest of the audience. Because if sustainability was inside it, you wouldn't have a problem. You wouldn't need to engage them. They'd already be keen greenies and all that. So what you have to do is find the overlap between their interests and sustainability. So in one of my favorite examples, a hospital in the southeast of England experimented with 3 messages for nurses on wards. Nurses are very busy people who are doing very important work, and they wanted them to switch off unnecessary lights and other equipment. The 3 messages were, first of all, switch it off and save the planet. Made no difference in the ward that was tried on. Second one, switch it off and save the NHS money. You would have thought, because we all love the NHS so much, that might resonate. Very little effect. The third one was switch off unnecessary equipment and lights. Your patients will get more rest and they'll recover more quickly. I think it was done slightly snappier than that, but that's, you know, my version of it. People, they took interest because nurses get out of bed in the morning to make their patients better. That's what they do. I discovered green jiu-jitsu working with engineers, and I'm an engineer. I was asked by one of my clients to come and talk to some engineers about how they could save energy at home by switching off their TV properly and stuff like that. I refuse point blank to get up in front of a group of engineers working really high-tech industry and tell them how to switch their TV off properly. That was a non-starter. So instead, I formulated a workshop using engineering tools to get the engineers to solve sustainability problems. Engineers get out of bed in the morning to solve problems, so they rolled up their sleeves and got stuck into it. So not only did we get engineers enthusing about how much fun this sustainability challenge was, we got loads of really, really good ideas. One of which was flagging up that teleconferencing problem that I mentioned before. So, you know, we got masses and masses of really actionable, practical stuff out of that as well. So we do a whole session on green jiu-jitsu and how to identify that sweet spot. But if you're doing engagement, I want you to think about your audience. And the best way to find the sweet spot, actually, to give away one of the main secrets, is to ask people. I do workshops with sustainability champions. I'm not a big fan of sustainability champions as a concept, but one of the things I find them useful to do is identifying that overlap between sustainability and the culture in the organization at the current time. I mentioned I wasn't keen on the idea of culture change. This is piggybacking on top of the current culture. Oh, I could go on about Green Jiu-Jitsu for a long time. I am going to have to leave it there because we are only halfway through and it's almost half past. Number 7, layer your communications. A big debate that goes on constantly, or some people just don't debate it and plunge in, is how much detail to present to your audience. So that orange arrow, where do you put it? How much is too little information? You might get accused of greenwash. How much is too much information? And you lose your audience. This is a bit similar to number 1 in concept, because the best solution to this is to layer your information and let the audience decide how deep they want to dig into that. So they'll be looking at the top surface like this, sort of like the ocean. They'll be looking at the surface level, and that would have the headline figures, some nice case studies, anecdotes, people like them doing great green stuff, which always works very well. And that's something that somebody can glance at and get a flavour of what's going on. A layer below that might be frequently asked questions. So if questions arising from those headline stories, you can have in a frequently asked questions Q&A, and people can go in, dip into that in more detail, and maybe only just a little bit that they need to know. And then below that, you can put all the detail, all the raw data, all the caveats, all the assumptions, all that information that if a non-governmental organization like Greenpeace or somebody was looking at your website or whatever, they can dive into that and get the information they want. So if they can't find it, they'll assume the answer is bad. Now, I mentioned websites because this is perfect for websites, because you can have that front page with everything nice and light and sort of coffee magazine-ish type stuff, and then you can go right down into the detailed science for those who want to go. And they make up their mind. But I have done it in an 8-page document, which was a sustainability strategy for one of our clients. First couple of if you open the first double page, you will get everything you need to know about the sustainability program, if all you want to know is they have one and they're covering all the bases. By the last double page, you had all the assumptions, caveats, responsibilities, etc., etc. And the idea was, if you bailed out somewhere amongst those few pages, if you turned over to the back page, it had a what does this mean for you, and sort of a call to action at the end. We were very pleased with that as a concept. We haven't been able to prove whether it worked any better than anything else, but conceptually I was very, very pleased with that. Okay, we're over halfway through. As far as I can see, we haven't had any questions yet. If anybody's got any, fire them through. Don't be shy. As I say, I will pick them up as and when I feel like it. Number 8, very important. Review the alignment between responsibility and authority. And this is where an awful lot of organizations fall down. It's one of the reasons why I don't like sustainability champions as the primary mechanism for delivering sustainability, because you can't give responsibility for something to people who have no authority. I was once approached by a lady at a conference after one of my talks. She said, "My problem is my sustainability champions aren't meeting their targets." And I said, when you say champion, what do you mean? And she meant volunteers. And it was junior people on sites, and she'd given them energy targets. And I said, well, take them off the champions, give them to the site managers. They have the authority to change stuff. So when you come to implement a sustainability strategy, you must make sure that the sustainability targets are embedded into your main reporting structure. They're not some nice to have. Sustainability champions have them, but as I say, they have to be seen as the oil in the engine, not the engine itself, or not the fuel in the engine. They cannot drive the sustainability vehicle. They can only help it happen. So think very hard about who's responsible and who's not. This picture, by the way, is the poor environmental manager surrounded by ISO 14001 documentation, who's trying to work out how they're going to meet any of their objectives, saying as every time they walk into, say, the production manager's office or the procurement manager's office. They can hear the sigh of exasperation as soon as they turn up. So it's got to be embedded into that reporting structure. Number 9, create the future you want. Hey, this is almost like sort of one of those cards that you send somebody with some, or the things that float about the internet saying, you know, we've just got to believe and conceive, believe, and you'll achieve, and all that sort of thing. But here's a very crafty method for making sustainability happen and proper change. See, most of us do a thing called forecasting. We look at where we are, and then we try and work out how to get to sustainability, which is the arbitrary green blob at the bottom. So we've got a business as usual trajectory, and we try and implement enough policies that bend the trend down towards sustainability. And generally that won't happen, and the reason why it won't happen is your mind is completely transfixed on the here and now. How you do business at the minute, and that baggage that all comes with it, and all the short-term trends, what we call the tyranny of the present, and that is not a good place to be. So what I do when I'm doing a sustainability strategy, and we'll be covering this in much more detail in the sustainability strategy Green Academy session, is we start at the end. Now, can I get a pen to work here? Oh, no. That's giving the pen to somebody else. Got a pen? There's a pen. You start here at the end point. So basically, you define what you mean by sustainability. I said mission zero for interface as a particular set of sustainability criteria, or you might have your science-based targets, you might have zero carbon, zero waste, whatever those targets are, and you think about what the organization would look like if you'd fulfilled those targets. I usually get people to draw this out on sheets of flip chart paper. What would the organization look like if you met it? So you forget about present day altogether, you think about the future. You then step backwards to an intermediate stage, usually halfway time-wise towards your targets. And then you decide at that point, what would you have to have achieved and what would you have to have stopped doing to be on the right trajectory to hit that endpoint? And that's quite a fascinating question to ask. And then you go back. I usually just do one intermediate step. You could do more if you felt necessary, but I think it's a bit too detailed, to the immediate actions you have to start doing now to get on that trajectory. And that simple sort of back to front way of doing it, it's not complex this, it's very simple, has an amazing effect on people because it frees their minds from today, lets them sort of create their vision, their fantasy vision, some would say, and then work out how to make that dream a reality by bringing it slowly back towards reality. And it is a very, very effective system, and we'll be doing a little bit of it later on. Right. Hopefully this will take me back then to try to get back to my there we go. Right, so that was number 9, how to turn your vision into reality. Number 10, maybe is this engineer in me again, and my original sustainability qualification was MPhil in eco-design, is unsustainability is poor design. This example is close to my heart because I do I'm sort of middle-aged man in Lycra. I like doing a lot of cycling. I did a triathlon last year, so a lot of endurance type sports. So I drink isotonic drinks. And Lucozade Sport, much to my annoyance, was flagged up by Recycle UK as one of the biggest villains in unrecyclable packaging, unnecessarily unrecyclable packaging, because they have a perfectly recyclable PET plastic bottle, and then they wrap it in an incompatible plastic film with the Lucozade logo and everything else on it to make it look nice. So if a householder puts that in with their plastic bottles thinking it's all nice and recyclable, at the materials recovery facility, they'll have to either hoik it out, or it could contaminate the whole lot of recycling, or else it will go in the bin. So the poor householder, and I do this, much to my annoyance, has to get a pair of scissors and, without cutting your fingers, cut off the film in order to make the bottle recyclable. Lucozade's response to this, or GlaxoSmithKline, who make Lucozade, I found very depressing. They said, we would welcome any technological solutions to this. It's like, well, don't do it. Nobody else does it. It's bad design. You're mixing two incompatible materials, which makes one very, very recyclable material, into a non-recyclable material. So if you think about that, about the power of design to avoid problems before they occur, or as William McDonough and Michael Braungart put it, take the filters out of the pipes and put them where they belong, in the designer's heads. We have to avoid these problems at the drawing board. And that can be for a product, it could be for a service, it could be a business model. If you design it to be sustainable from scratch, then you won't be running around trying to mitigate problems once they've occurred. A very powerful principle. Number 11, sustainability by innovation. This is one of my favorite case studies. Most of us follow sustainability targets. We use backcasting to try and work out how to get there. Chimera, who make industrial fabrics or commercial fabrics, they have a slightly different approach. They do have targets for their internal stuff, but their main sustainability drive is just, wouldn't it be really cool to have a really sustainable product? So every iteration of that product, they try and take it another level in solving a sustainability problem. So one of their big breakthroughs is they found that if they mixed wool with a bast fiber, and a bast fiber is something like nettles, cannabis, or sisal, they get a naturally flame retardant fabric. So they can do away with artificial flame retardants, which are a massive environmental problem. You know, they're found in the bodies of polar bears and other Arctic and Antarctic wildlife who have never been near a product with a flame retardant in it, but they're persistent and they're highly mobile, so they travel the world. So they've eliminated that, and then they do things like go to Starbucks and say, can we have some of your waste coffee sacks after you've used them? They found that that was perfect, the sisal in the coffee sack, for making this fabric, and now they sell the chairs back, the fabrics covered chairs, back to Starbucks by saying, this chair fabric is made out of your old coffee sacks. And they keep doing these things. They just keep thinking to themselves, oh, wouldn't it be really cool if we did that? Or we've really got to solve that problem. What can we do? You know, and it's almost the opposite of all the thing about targets and strategies and all the rest. And it's joyous. So if you can harness the two of them, if you can have that sort of, yeah, let's do something really fantastic and innovate and come up with really clever ideas, try them out, keep the ones that work, and then try a lot of more stuff, then that is a very powerful mindset to get stuck into. Right, number 12, the last one of the 12, and then we'll summarize, then we'll come on to the half, is to think about the customer first and foremost. And this is one of my favorite case studies, slightly out of date, because Glenn Bennett, the guy behind the wheel of this electric van, has sold up EAE Limited, which was the leaflet delivery company, or distribution company that he set up. And he is, you know, the most socially environmentally minded person I've ever come across who's not a hippie. He's really hard-nosed. You know, it's literally his way or the highway. He told me that one of his directors didn't get it, is no longer working with the company. I think he let that hang, and I could interpret that any way I wanted. But before there was any financial reward for installing wind turbines, he installed this wind turbine on this site in Edinburgh. Now, he did all that just to be a good citizen. But what he found was that Scottish public sector organisations, when they're letting contracts, give a huge amount of credit for sustainability performance. So they mark them. So they have a marking system. So you get a certain, you might get marked out of 50, say, for value for money. But a full 30% of some of them give money for environmental and social performance, because as public sector organisations, they want to drive sustainability. And what Glenn is finding is everybody else is putting in a sustainability policy. He was putting in a picture of his wind turbine. And he was winning those contracts, because this is an industry where it's very hard for one company to distinguish itself above another without just going for driving down costs. And he could actually avoid just, tearing the company to the bone to try and keep costs down by saying, well, our leaflet, our electric vehicles are powered by wind turbines, charge up the batteries overnight. So on a local level, the delivery is carbon neutral. And that was a very exciting thing to do. So then suddenly he started focusing on what his customers were looking for. And an example of that is another Terra Infirma client, Johnson Matthey, has recently renamed all its divisions. Now, they're a catalysis firm. So they used to be called, the divisions used to be called things like process technologies. But they sort of swapped around the names from that sort of inward-looking process base to the outcome that they were delivering, because they realized that 85 to 90% of their turnover comes from solving other people's environmental problems. So their divisions are called Clean Air, Efficient Use of Natural Resources, Health. So environmental or social problems, I should say, to include health in there. But it's sort of that broader idea of sustainability. That's what they do. And I love this because it speaks outside the company to what they do in practice, what they're doing for the planet, for the world, for humanity, rather than just their customers. And I think it focuses minds inside. If you work for the Clean Air division, then the idea that the company is going to have very strong sustainability targets doesn't seem to conflict with that. It's all compatible. So they've swapped the whole thing around to think about the customer rather than their process. So I like that a lot. So think customer is number 12, which brings us to those 12 conclusions there. I'm going to give you a second to finish off any of your scribbles on your workbook, trying to think of ideas to implement and doing those high, medium, low. And I'll be back with you in a second. I'm just going to read through the questions. I can see we've got at least one. I'll just have a check and see. Right, Andy said, you may also have to interface with the end user to allow champions to make changes without complaint. Well, yes, but I would still argue that if the authority that your champions have is just a smile or just a little simple project, I suppose like the duck board or something like that, then they're not going to be making changes. The responsibility for making changes should be with that the end user inside the company, so whether it's procurement manager, operations manager, fleet manager, whoever it might be, they should have that hardwired into their annual objectives if you want to make real change happen. Okay, so if we go back to the workbook, I'll get it up here so I can show you what I mean. And we scroll down. There's a grid marked assessment. We've got opportunity on the vertical axis, and risk cost, the sort of downside on the horizontal axis. Now, when you do this, note where high, medium, low are, because they're in different order for a reason that you'll see in a minute. If you write the number of each of the application of the ideas rather than the idea itself from your workbook, if you write them into that grid, the best ones should end up top right, and the worst ones for you should, by your assessment, should be bottom left. And again, it's just trying to illustrate the sort of assessment we do on Green Academy. Very simple, but really quite powerful. You might think about these later, come back to them and say, oh, actually I've got that one wrong, that should be in a different box. So I'll give you a second to do that. Any more questions, fire them through. I am more than happy to stay on after 3 o'clock if anybody has any questions after that, but we will finish the recording at 3 o'clock. Okay, and then I mentioned we finish every session of Green Academy with one exercise, and it's the same because it's powerful and it's a form of backcasting, very simple form of backcasting. What I'd like you to do is write down the 3 best ideas that you have had from this webinar, whether it's something I've said or more likely your application of what I've said. So really I'm just giving you generic concepts. You've been trying to apply them to your circumstance. So write down the 3 ones that get you most excited. They're more than likely to be the ones that were in the top right of that assessment grid that you've been filling in. Then think forward 6 months to a year. What would you like to be doing differently as a result of those 3 ideas? 1, 2, 3. And then lastly, what 3 actions would you like to take now? So this afternoon, Thursday, Friday, let's say end of last week is our usual boundary for action, because otherwise you'll forget it. What 3 actions would you like to take to set that ball rolling? And at this stage, I want you to focus down on the really sort of micro steps. So request meeting with the finance manager. Plan workshop to do some green jiu-jitsu, whatever it might be, but it has to be the smallest step. Not quite pick up a piece of paper, but not far off it. The immediate action you would have to do to make that happen should be those last 3. And then a bit like backcasting on a huge scale, it's backcasting on a small scale because it's taking a sort of amorphous idea, making it more concrete by deciding what you'd like to be doing differently in 6 months to a year, and then working out what you have to do now to start on that process. And that's the power of Green Academy, I would say. Right. So we're heading towards that. Okay, that's 12 ideas. 12 and a half. It's a half because it's a bit cheeky, because it's another advert. Turbocharge your skill set. I believe very passionately that all of us in sustainability can keep learning. None of us know it all. Some people like to think they know everything, but none of us know it all. So there are 3 ways Terra Firma can help you improve your skill set. 1 is Green Academy, and you should have a good flavour of how it works. All I'd say is, in our normal sessions, I speak less and you do more exercises. I took that break to take a glass of water because I have been talking almost non-stop for 52 minutes. The second one is the Corporate Sustainability Mastermind Group. Now, this is a small group of people in large organizations So not consultancies, but large organizations who are working in that organization on their sustainability strategy. And we meet 4 times a year, facilitated discussion under the Chatham House rule, so we can have an open and honest conversation with each other about what those members are doing and how we can learn from each other to solve problems or take on new challenges or whatever it might be. So there's no PowerPoint, no consultants or experts or anything like that. Chatham House rule, so you can say what was said, but you can't say who said it. And we always have a nice lunch as well. It's based in the northeast of England, so if you want an interest in that, and we do have a vacancy, you do have to be prepared to be available in the northeast of England. And the last one, one-to-one coaching. People seem to think coaching's, an admission of failure, but Roger Federer has a coach. Usain Bolt, Mo Farah, they have coaches. The coaches aren't as good as runners as Usain Bolt or Mo Farah, but they know how to help them get the best out of what they can. And that's what we do in the one-to-one coaching. And some of our clients have had some wonderful results where generally they have thought of an idea which has come from a coaching question from that. So it's a powerful way of doing it. So that's why I stick that at 12.5, because I realize that's a bit cheeky. It is an advert, but then again, this session is free. The paid-for sessions don't have any advertising in them. And as a special offer, if you'd like to start with Green Academy, those 10 sessions this year, we will knock 25% off the price if you sign up by 31st January. I'll send around a link with the link to the recording, etc., and you can get 10 hours of unique sustainability training for £26.40 plus VAT an hour, which is ridiculous, if I may say so myself. Okay, I'm going to leave that up. I've got another question coming through from Suzanne. I'm a sustainability champion. Recently it was remarked that we're good at coming up with ideas but not implementing them. I guess that's to argue what we should be used for, and some with some responsibility should implement them. The problem is they aren't, because they either aren't interested or don't have the resources. Any suggestions? If you can get them into the room by hook or crook, run a workshop. So don't give them your idea, because the problem is, if I walk up to you and say, here's what I think you should do, you will say no, or you'll try desperately to think of reasons why you shouldn't do it. That's the way our brains naturally work. So, if anybody's read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winner on decision making, psychologists have demonstrated that if somebody's asked to implement somebody else's idea, they exaggerate the downsides and play down the benefits. If it's their own idea, they do the opposite. They exaggerate the benefits and play down the downside. So what I would say is sort of scratch that mechanism of you coming up with an idea and then try and persuade somebody else to implement it. Try and get those people in the room and get them to have their own ideas, because they will go and implement them. I've seen it happen. It's extraordinary. If you do have a burning idea, though, okay, that's sort of a take a step back to the overall conversation. But if you do have an idea and you want to get it implemented, ask for help. Go to that person, and instead of saying, I want you to do this, or I think you should do this, is you say, I was thinking about doing X. What would be the best way to go about this? And as soon as you start asking people for help, doors open. So that's what I would say on that one. Any other questions firing through? Just scrolling through to make sure. Right, well, it's 3 minutes before 3 o'clock. I think if any, keep firing questions through while I'm just sort of doing the summing up here. but we will definitely stop at 3 o'clock. Uh, I've been firing an awful lot of stuff at you, so it might take a while to go away and let some of it absorb. A bit in the way that I was just talking to Suzanne there. I've been throwing ideas at you, and you're probably going, your natural reaction, because all of us are human, is, well, that won't work for me. But do try and think about how you can make some of those concepts work, and then whether it's worth it. Let me know if I can help on anything, because we do have all these mechanisms to help you. And as I say, I will send out the special offer details after the session. So that just leaves it to me to thank you all for taking part. Thank you for coming along and listening through today. I hope you've got loads of great ideas to go and implement, because at the end of the day, that's what we're about. I'm not interested in hearing my own voice, and I don't make any money out of Green Academy, I've got to say. But what we wanted to see is you taking those ideas and making your organization a better organization, and overall, I suppose, the world a better place to live in. And every time you make an improvement, you should be proud of yourself. So I will leave it there at the end of the recording. Thank you very much for taking part.